Thanks to all of you for coming out on this rainy night. It's fun to be back here in my old stomping grounds. About a dozen years ago, my wife and I adopted a little white rescue dog, half poodle, half mutt, a muttapoo, I guess. 10 or 12 pounds, an adorable little thing, and we named her Tilly. Our first summer with her was absolutely magical. There was no way we could have kept from falling in love with that little dog. When we taught her to sit, she learned it really quickly, but she had her own little opinions about it. She'd go, She had a gigantic tail that she would spin sometimes like this, as if she was getting ready to take off. For 6 years, she had the temperament of a puppy. And then she began to have some health problems, including one that absolutely no vet we ever took her to could figure out. About 3 or 4 times a year, she'd go through this 24-hour episode where it was suddenly like you stabbed her, poked her with a needle. She would just jump up and run off for no reason at all and trot around in circles as she calmed herself down and then come lie down again until it happened again after another 20 minutes. Later, she lost her vision in one eye because of cataract surgery that didn't work out. And later still, something must have happened when we weren't around. We really never knew. Maybe she fell down the stairs, but suddenly, she seemed like a much older dog. Her tail, which she'd always carried up over her back, started to hang down. It wasn't long before we had to start helping her on the stairs. But nothing could have kept us from adoring her. Every night when we got in bed, I spent a minute and a half hovering over her, scratching her little head, and telling her how much I loved her, and that every day with Tilly was a good day. Then last September, she started doing something very strange, snapping her head to one side and making a funny noise like, we thought she might be trying to get something out of her teeth. But then, a couple of weeks later, when I happened to be out of town, Tilly had a full-blown seizure. My wife wrapped her up in a blanket and rushed her off to the vet. But by the end of the day, the seizures had become uncontrollable without strong medications. A couple of days later, a veterinary neurologist confirmed what we feared, a brain tumor. We hoped for a few more good months, but it didn't take long to see that Tilly was not herself. Anxious, unsettled, uncomfortable. That really awful day that every dog owner knows is going to come much too soon had come sooner than we were expecting it. A couple of days later, I went to practice my classical guitar late in the afternoon, as I do most days. And ordinarily, Tilly would have been right there on the floor next to me. I happened to be working on a beautiful piece by Bach, and as I began to practice it, suddenly I felt this surge of anguish rising up in me. It was exactly like seeing a pot on the stove that is going to boil over, and there is nothing you can do to get to it in time. I barely had time to get my guitar back in its case before I began to sob. I'd lost pets before, and I'd known that losing Tilly would be especially hard, but this was something that I couldn't fully understand. So when I got my composure back, I called my old therapist from many years ago, long retired, but I, say hi to him from time to time. I knew he'd have something smart to say, and he did. Arthur, don't you know that every grief has tendrils to other griefs? My mother grew up in extraordinary privilege in New York City. Her grandfather, Adolph Vox, started his publishing career in Chattanooga when he bought the Chattanooga Times at the age of 19. In his mid-30s, he moved to New York and took over the then struggling New York Times. By the time my mother was born in 1921, it would have been an understatement to say that the family wanted for nothing. The townhouse off Fifth Avenue where she grew up is now a consulate. But in spite of all the privilege there were things about her upbringing that she really didn't like. And she vowed that when she had children, she would raise them differently. In her 20s, during World War II, she joined the Red Cross and went to England, where she served donuts to flyers taking off on raids. There she met a lieutenant in the Army Air Corps with a desk job, 10 years older than her, and they fell in love. He was charming and handsome and athletic and funny, but he also drank a lot, and he smoked a lot, and he could be unpredictable. After the war, they married and settled in Chattanooga, where my family still owned the newspaper. He became the publisher. In 5 years, they had 3 children, 2 boys and a girl. Then another 5 years later, along came a 4th baby, almost certainly an accident. Not that I mind being an accident, by the way. I'm very happy to be here, however it may have happened. But the marriage was in serious trouble by then. My father had always been quick to anger. If he'd had a coat of arms, I can tell you what his motto would have been because he said it so often. I'm so goddamn angry I can't see straight. It can't have helped his frame of mind that the wealthy, powerful family that had given him his job could easily take it away again. As if there wasn't already enough turmoil in the house, the new baby had come with 2 severely clubbed feet, fortunately for me, fixable by casts. I guess it's no surprise, really, that I don't remember the fighting going on in the house. I think I was very coddled as a baby. I certainly do remember how my father used to take out so much of his anger on my oldest brother who never deserved it. One night, I watched through the balustrade on the stairs as the police delivered my brother back again after he'd run away for who knows how many times, who can blame him. The first thing my father said to him was, "Go up and tell your brother good night, he's been waiting for you." And the most remarkable thing happened. My brother came up the stairs as sweetly and affectionately as if there was nothing else going on, and in the warmest way kissed me lovingly good night before going back downstairs to face my father's rage. But here's the curious thing. I don't have a single memory of my father ever being angry with me. I remember him as gentle and affectionate. When he came down in the morning, he sometimes rubbed his stubbly cheek against mine because it made me laugh. We had a sunroom at one end of our house. And I remember him sitting in the chair there watching The Honeymooners on our black and white television. I would sometimes go in there to play with him, and he'd been a boxer, so he would put up his hands and I was supposed to punch at him and he would block them. But the thing is, sometimes I got through and connected with the reading glasses he kept in his shirt pocket. I can remember the distinctive click. And he would kind of sputter in irritation. But he was never really angry. I mean, not like I heard him with other people. I think it's very likely that in this wounded little boy, he must have seen something of his wounded self. Then, one day when I was 6 years old, suddenly my father was kneeling in front of me with tears streaming down his face, and he said, "Goodbye, son." A couple of days later, I remember sitting on the floor in my parents' bathroom while my mother lay submerged in the tub, and she said, "Do you know what a divorce is? Because your father and I are getting one." That was it. Pretty much the whole conversation. I don't remember anything else about it. My father moved to Florida, and I visited him 3 or 4 times a year, sometimes for 4 or 5 days at a time. I remember our visits very fondly. We played a lot of gin rummy. We ate freshly shucked oysters. He would make me creme de menthe drinks frozen in the blender, not knowing that a 10 or 11-year-old boy probably wasn't supposed to be consuming alcohol. I drank them happily. Then, at the very start of my school vacation, 8th grade year, suddenly he died one night at the age of 58 from emphysema. It's funny, but I had never known how dangerous emphysema could be. I thought he'd, just would be fine. And anyway, it's a very strange thing. I never cried. I never cried when I heard he died. And I'd never cried before that when he left. It was a puzzling thing, even for me. Therapy is kind of like putting on gloves and clearing out that closet that you've been meaning to get to. I mean, obviously, it'd be a lot easier just to keep the door closed, but of course, it's not a closet, it's your life. For me, a lot of the mess obviously had to do with my father, who I might almost have said at that time had been just a minor figure in my life, almost completely lost in the gigantic shadow cast by my mother's family. But there were other issues, not least of all my feet. Maybe because I had a superb therapist, I found the process, although extremely painful, completely transformative. But no matter how well it goes, there's always going to be things way back in that closet that you didn't quite get around to clearing out. At first, I resisted linking the loss of Tilly with anything else. I thought a lot about her death. I agonized over it. For a long while, her absence was the biggest thing in our house, by far. But gradually, I began to make a connection that probably should have been obvious. My father had never been a healthy man when I knew him. 2 packs of cigarettes a day does take its toll. He laughed his way into a coughing fit when we play boxed in the sunroom. And he laughed his way into a coughing fit years later when we played gin rummy in Florida. As far as I knew, he died suddenly in the middle of his life, just the way Tilly had. That empty chair, all through my childhood, it must have been like an enormously loud hum in the background, impossible to ignore. And yet somehow I managed to ignore it. Well, until last year. We think of our love of dogs as the simplest kind of love there is. They remind us that sometimes the moment itself is enough. Maybe I should have known that losing Tilly would set off echoes from my past, but I think maybe we all mean much more complicated things to the people who love us than we ever really understand. It's something that even sometimes little white rescue dogs do. Thank you.